I was born in Norfolk, Virginia, June 13, 1922. My family was one brother, two sisters, of course father and mother, and my father died when I was 5 years old in June 1927. Growing up, I was a peculiar sort of a person, I suppose. While other kids liked toys and other trinkets, at 5 years old I developed a taste for maps, regular maps, road maps, any kind of maps. People thought I was a little screwy. When someone else at my age wanted a toy soldier or Bob Jacks, I wanted a map. So I grew up trying to figure out where I was and how to get there, and where I was going and how to get there. After my father passed, my uncle came into my household, helped raise us. He was a younger brother to my mother, and he taught me quite a bit. He was a very honorable man, so was my mother. My mother taught me that honesty is the way to go, and cleanliness. She was a nut about cleanliness. And that sort of followed me all the rest of my life until today. When the war broke out, I was allowed to go to the Naval Engineering School. I passed pretty high on the test that they gave for students wanting to go to engineering school of the Navy. I was at school for about a year. Of course, the war broke out in 1939, and there were rumors of war constantly, of what we were going to do and so forth. I was only 18, 19 years old. And we knew that sooner or later that the United States was going to be involved in the war. But we wanted to pick out a particular unit that we wanted to go into. I always wanted to be a fighter pilot. Why, I have no idea. And 2 or 3 other classmates of mine also had an idea of what we wanted to do. We wanted to choose our service and choose what we wanted to go into, but the military, our own military, wouldn't even think of it. We wanted to be officers, of course, naturally, and we thought we were smart enough to be officers. And we talked to each other pretty frequently about what we wanted to do, so we decided all of a sudden, this was in 1941, we were going to look around and see what we can do, and sure enough, Canada had ads in newspapers and magazines. They were looking for Spitfire fighter pilots. And of course, at that time, they would take somebody out of the kindergarten if they thought they could qualify. So we made up a pact, 3 of us, made up a pact to go up to Ontario, Hamilton, the home of the RCAF, to see what was going on. Of course, we wrote them and talked to them, and they said, come up. We did. We went to several of the physical examinations with them. This was just December 1941. Around the 1st, 2nd of December. We passed all the physicals requirements, passed all the mental examinations that they had, and we were waiting to go into the Cadets Training Corps on December the 8th. We were to sign our papers on December the 8th. We were waiting around in a hotel in Hamilton, Sunday afternoon, had nothing else to do but wait until the big day, December the 8th. And of course, on the radio we heard that December the 7th came about and Pearl Harbor. We got to Norfolk, and again, we were still too young to get into what we wanted, so we stayed in school until about July 1942. Some propaganda came out of Fort Monroe, Virginia. They were looking for superior young men, superior physical attributes, and also smart. They put out bulletins that they were trying to form a paratroop unit. Of course, we knew nothing about it, but it sounded good to us. I don't know what the other two did, but I signed up at Fort Monroe, Virginia to go into the 506 Parachute Infantry. When we finally got to Toccoa, we were putting into a holding company. They had already started developing companies. As a matter of fact, we were a little late as far as the companies were concerned. We were put into a W company. That was the holding company until they weeded out the misfits to bring into the unit. There were 7,000 people that qualified to get into the 506. That was a big deal to where to put them. Fort Bragg would be the ideal place because they had plenty of room. In Fort Bragg, officers there said, we don't want them. We don't want to have anything to do with them because there'd be a failure. Fort Benning was the next stop because they had just developed the Army Airborne School, built towers and other things that would bring people into a new formed parachute regiment and certainly a division of airborne people. Fort Benning says, we don't need another failure, not here. And went throughout Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, all of them said, we don't want them. Then they came up with this place called Camp Tombs, named after a Georgia senator during the 1850s. Camp General Senator Toombs preached secession back in 1852. So they couldn't well keep the name Toombs, so they changed it to Camp Toccoa. And the Army said this is a good place for them, because when they fall flat on their face, nobody would have ever heard of this super unit concept, nor would they have ever heard of Camp Toccoa. Colonel Sink helped develop the program with the folks at Fort Monroe. And what they developed was unheard of. In fact, unheard of then or now. Nothing has ever been before or since of what they put us through to weed down to the regimental strength of 2,600 men, which would include the override of 2,500 to form the regiment. Nothing developed before nor since of the things they put us through in order to cut down the 7,000 to 2,600. They almost killed all of us. After they qualified us physically fit, then they sent my particular people to I Company. We went to I Company maybe the 4th day or 5th day that I was in the Army. We assigned to these old beat up barracks, tar paper barracks. The first morning, being in I company, the first sergeant blew his whistles and say, "Fall in." We didn't know what fall in meant, but we figured that we had to get in front of him, in front of the barracks. He said, "This is to be your first exercise as a trooper of the 506. Now, about face. Some of us knew what about face meant. I didn't, but I imagined it meant turn around, and we did. We found out it meant turn around later. Now look up, we looked up, and there was Currahee. Currahee was a mountain that's the last mountain in the chain of the Appalachians, almost at the end of the Appalachian Trail. It was of course, the Appalachian Trail ended before Currahee, but Currahee was the last mountain of the Appalachian Trail, right at our camp, base of our camp. He said, "Now you're going to run that mountain, and you're going to run it and not walk it, and you're not going to stop until you got to the top." And he said, "We have 12 or 15 men situated the 3.5 miles to the top, and if he caught you stopped, you will be out of the 506 tonight. No ifs, and buts, or maybe. When you get to the top, you will have a 3-minute rest. After 3 minutes, you will run down the mountain and report back here. You can run as slow as you wish, but it has to be a run." That was the first exercise we had, and we lost about 15% more that first day. How I did it, I'll never know, but I was determined, and I did make the mountain. It's 3.5 miles up, 3.5 miles down. We had training grounds outside of the post. The training areas were at least 10 to 12 miles off post. Every day we had to do something different at our training areas. We had to double time to our training post, do our training, and then come back to camp every day, except the days that we ran Currahee, and that was about 3 times per week for the entire time that we were at Toccoa. It became so that Currahee was not a walk in the park, but it was less stressful, and we all had to do it. If you fell out, if you stopped, even though we were 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks into training, you were out of the 506 that night. Rifle training, weapons training, machine gun training, mortar training took place at our training areas from Toccoa. And incidentally, Toccoa was what we called a running camp. All during the duty hours, about 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening, everybody double timed no matter what they did at the camp itself, whether we went to the mess hall, whether we went to the PX, or whether we went to the churches, or anything else. We double timed, including all the officers. The only officer that did not double time when he was in Toccoa was Colonel Sink himself. Typical day was in the morning, 6 o'clock, you were at breakfast, a very meager breakfast. That was part of the training. No fancy stuff. We had breakfast. We were issued some sort of a C rations or K ration for our lunch, which we packed for the field. We had no service in the field at all. again part of the training. We didn't realize that that was superb meal that we had until later, of course. And then, of course, after training, we came back to camp for our dinner. And the cooks we had apparently were not trained as cooks, but we survived. Now, we had extensive map training, which I was very good at because that was my hobby. And I developed a flare for the machine gun and all other things, patrol training, everything that had to do with sooner or later we had to use in our combat bowls. The 2nd Battalion had a lot more men than they needed because they were the 2nd Battalion formed, and naturally they put more men in the 2nd Battalion as we went along to fill them up and form the nucleus of the 2nd Battalion. They still had to get rid of a lot of people, even at the point about 16 and a half, 17 weeks. They devised a scheme how to get rid of the people that they needed to get rid of because Fort Benning says you cannot have more than a 10% overage to qualify jump training. They devised this thing about, instead of riding the train to Atlanta and then to Fort Benning, they were going to walk to to Atlanta from Toccoa. They walked from Toccoa to Atlanta with full field pack, everything except the parachute. All the weapons, all the ammunition, landmines, everything else that you needed to go into combat with when you jumped, except the parachute. And they were going to walk in 4 days, 119 miles in 4 days. They started. Of course, they accomplished what they wanted to do. They got rid of the people, because if they fell out doing that march for any reason, they were out of the 506 and into another, probably an infantry unit of some kind. They made the march successfully, got on a train in Fort Benning, at Atlanta, and then went to Fort Benning by train. The 3rd week, it was time for the 3rd Battalion, my battalion, to get to Fort Benning. It was time. We had finished everything. Prior to going to the big walk, we had a mission to walk from Clemson, Georgia, back to Camp Toccoa as a training mission. About 3-4 weeks before we went down to Fort Benning, we wanted to do total weapons training with the entire regiment. Now, we did a lot of weapons training in Toccoa, but Toccoa's rifle and mortar facilities were very sparse, very small. We could not do the entire regiment at one time. The colonel wanted us to do a total regimental rifle and weapons training. The nearest place was a school called Clemson College, South Carolina. At that time, it was a military school, and we found out later they had a huge facility for weapons training and marching, parade grounds, and so forth. It was beautiful. So we decided to take trucks, of course, to Clemson. One morning we fell out. This was about the middle of November. And we saw all these trucks in the morning, just after we had our breakfast. We were told to get all of our gear together, including our tent, sleeping gear, what have you, and load the trucks. We had never had trucks before. We walked, ran everywhere we went. Got on the trucks. Next stop was Clemson College, South Carolina. It was 49 miles. Got off the trucks. This was Thursday. We fired all day on these beautiful ranges that they had. Weapons firing, rifles, machine gun, mortar, 60 millimeter mortar, and 81 millimeter mortar, and also landmine training. First time we had done landmine training. We fired weapons all day Thursday. Friday, we fired all day again Friday. That evening, we were told at the mess hall, after we ate, to form into the parade grounds. At least 3,000 men were at that parade ground. Colonel Sink, through microphones and loudspeakers, told us to get out our compass and put our sleeping packs back on the ground. They were going to take them to Toccoa, and gave us a azimuth to Toccoa, cross country. We were to walk to Toccoa during the night, cross Bear Mountain, cross country, cross Bear Mountain between us and Toccoa. And we checked into Toccoa the next morning. We'd sign in at our unit. Few of the guys went to Toccoa by the way of Atlanta, because Atlanta was a good town to have a few drinks. And at that time, they knew we were pretty good soldiers. And they didn't, of course, they said they got lost, which of course was a lie. But they enjoyed themselves in Atlanta for an extra day. This was prior to us going down to Atlanta. So we knew what marching was, we knew was walking. Now, the 3rd Battalion got to Atlanta. We off-boarded at Camp McPherson at Atlanta, told to gather our weapons, and we were going to walk to Fort Benning. And that was 149 miles, and they said walking is very good for you. We're going to try to do it in the same time it took the 2nd Battalion to walk 119 miles. And we started. We had a lot more men than did have the 2nd Battalion, or certainly the 1st Battalion. But we got rid of them. We got to Atlanta, 148 and a half miles. Someone decided that we were going to run the last half mile into the Fort Benning gate, because thousands of people were waiting to cheer us on. And the jump school had big signs waiting for us to welcome us. It said, "Welcome 3rd Battalion, 506, Parachute Infantry Regiment, long talkie, big walkie, no jumpy." And they decided at that time they were going to really get rid of us. We were going to train at the jump school in company units. Our company fell out in front of the darling of the Army parachute school. Officers in gold letters, U.S. Army Parachute School on their chest, with ribbons on their pants and sleeves. And they gave us a lecture, and they said that we were welcome there, but please understand only half of us will only qualify for that wings because that's the way it is. It's that tough. Doing it on 3 phases. The first phase was physical training to be able to jump out of an airplane. And we all looked at one another, physical training, physical conditioning and training. The second phase was to familiarize us with parachutes, parachute packing. We would pack our 5 jump parachutes that we were going to qualify in, and of course the jump itself and tower training. It said, now the first phase we're going to start right away, and we were in our jump boots, our coveralls. They said, now we're going to run you into the ground, and of course the ones that fall out is finished. So we ran about an hour and 15 minutes. We looked around, and these guys from parachute school were sweating very heavily. So we wondered when they were going to stop, and sure enough, they stopped about an hour and 20 minutes into the run and yelled out, "Have we had enough?" We yelled back at them. We thought we were just warming up. Now let's do some real running. Of course, we were endeared to them very much so. And no more physical training for us while we were at the jump school. They came up with all kinds of schemes and devices, but we weathered them. As hard as they got, we got harder. Until finally, it was time to make the jump. We also got that time another lecture telling us that at least quite a few of us would want to be refused to jump. It's okay to refuse the first jump. On the second jump, it meant 6 months in the brig. Why? Because they had spent all that money getting us where we were, and we understood that. And they said at least 25% were the washout. It so happened the only ones that washed out that were injured on the tower, maybe 2 or 3 of the whole bunch, and they finally decided to, and as a matter of fact, to make the last jump, about, I'd say 40% made 5 jumps the first day. The rest of us made the rest of the 4 jumps the second day. And it was time to go. And they had the intestinal fortitude to cut a place out of Fort Bragg and named it Camp McCall. They did not want to have us associated with Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg was part of McCall, or McCall was part of Fort Bragg. Fort McCall was about 18 miles from the main post. We stayed there for our advanced infantry training, where we jumped as often as we could, and we had serious training there until time to go to Tennessee maneuvers. And this time they thought that they were going to really get rid of us. They didn't know what to do with us. As a matter of fact, when you got rid of, when the unit finished their basic training, some division would have accepted them as part of the division. But it was not to be. we were accepted only provisional with the 101st Airborne Division for quarters and so forth. We had a defense mission. As a machine gunner, I was told to select a defense position in the woods at Camp McCall. We had plenty of woods. About 2 o'clock afternoon, February the 18th, the colonel himself, Colonel Wolverton, Lieutenant Colonel Wolverton, came around to inspect the areas of his battalion. And again, we were pretty good soldiers at that time. In fact, we were supposed to be good soldiers with all the training we had. I reported to him as PFC, "Shame, sir." He said, "What do you have here, soldier?" I said, "We have a machine gun defense position." And he looked at it. He said, "Shames, who set this position?" I said, "I did, sir." He said, and I recall very well, "How did you set it up? Oh, who helped you?" I said, "Sir, I set it up myself." And he repeated, "Yourself?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "How'd you do it?" I said, "With a map, sir." He said, "Can you read a map?" I said, "Sir, I can read a map as well as any officer that you have in your battalion." He said, "Did you understand what you just told me, Private Shames?" I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "I can read a map as well as any officer that you have in your battalion." And he looked around. He said, "Did you make overlays of your position?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did." He said, "You have overlays?" I said, "Yes, sir." I showed him my overlays, and the ground was perfect for infiltrators in that position. That was my hobby since I was 5 years old, to read maps, where kids at my age wanted toys or Bob Jacks. I was a little peculiar, was known to be peculiar, because I wanted maps. I still do at my age. I love maps. And he said, "I'll be back." "Yes, sir." Saluted him. He walked, came back with 3 of his company commanders. They stayed there looking at the position that I had set up. He dismissed them. He still walked around, came back to me. He said, "Shames, how would you like to be my operations sergeant?" Of course, I was astounded, very much so. I said, "Sir, that calls for staff sergeant." He said, "I can't make you a first staff sergeant right away." He said, "But if you make out, I will make you a staff sergeant in 10 days after making you a buck sergeant." He said, "Report to me Monday morning." This was Friday. "Report to me Monday morning at my headquarters." "Do you know where it is?" I said, "Yes, sir." Of course, I was overwhelmed. Monday morning, I went up to my first sergeant after chow, and I said, "Sergeant, I've got to be at battalion headquarters at 8 o'clock. "What the hell for?" I said, "Because the colonel asked me to be there." "The colonel asked you to be there?" I said, "Yes, I did." "Yes, he did." He said, "Let's you and I go to the company commander." Company commander was a tough SOB, very tough. Went to the company commander. First sergeant said, Shames tells me that he's got to report to the battalion commander at 8 o'clock. So he said, company commander says, what the hell for? I said, sir, I have no idea. I do not question the battalion commander, nor do I question you, sir. All right, if you got to be there at 8 o'clock, get moving. Yes, sir. So, reported to the battalion commander. He said, Shames, you're now a sergeant. He said, this is your desk right outside of my office. Yes, sir. This is the S3's desk. He's not here right at the moment. He'll be here shortly. And he has already been informed that you are going to be the operations sergeant of the battalion. Yes, sir. And that's how I became, 10 days later, a staff sergeant. And I was landed in England as a staff sergeant. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. No idea where we were going to go, but on troop train, we knew that it was going to New York, and therefore we knew we were going to go to England and be part of the invasion in Normandy.